change being constant, and you being an older avatar for the only the reason to raise out of the victim, for the victory, for the conviction, for the separate, for the convicted, for the convoluted, for the this will be the phony home. It never makes sense to find the temple of the sin, for the insinuating, for the intermittent, for the food for thought, for the we waited, for the understanding, for the wait was lost to be the found, for the oligarchy eating, for only applying, for the Applebee's and pollinate, for the innate interpretation, without fulfilling the spirit, for the mystical timelines and timeouts of truth and historical orbicals in history, for only diversions in nutrition, for the alphabetical alpha and omegas without the rib decay, to be for the creative, for the enriched and poor quality poetry, baby back for the Buddha, for the body embedded to symbolize the Siddhartha, having the heart for the vows of the Buddha. Baby, this is dying for the sanctuary, for the inspired the spirit, and to that for the unto make this salam salat alone, for the salat alone, and offering for the benevolence and the violence, but not criminally act, but the temple for the template. We even an esoteric for the bestow. We told it between the middle for the righteousness, for the illiterate, for the distant word, for the found, for the manipulation, for the population to control line, for this truly stand outside those lines for the space-time. Those who won't stop watching time, for the stop watching the words, to stop eating the words, and digest justice, for the in case of the heart burns to the world's biggest heart. Play for the globe, for the wealth, for the foul play, for the plagiarism, for the kingship, for the imperialism, for the personality, person and nato for the id, for the ego, for the judge, the ego's day, for the OJ, for the OJs and the bluebird, for the tongue play, for the rest of the behind the bird, for the 369 institutes of life, for the nationalities, for the anomalies, convert the deities for the contractions and making an immaculate conception of reality, for the really, for the relocated, for the real estate, for the gates of the templates. Pinot lands for the penetrated, for the label, for the interactive, for the innovative, for the jaded. Who enough for the fancy, for the royalty, for the salty currency, for the dependency, for the pen you like the donkey, for the party depend you, for the making your ass out of you too, for the sleep, for the RE, for the remedies, for the maintaining, for the suntan, for the roll up, for the dry bones and the illusion, for the conclusion to be deterred. Until determined, for the ignorant, for the blind, the deterrent. He said the rent was too high, for the who shot that joint, for the ligament, for the mention, the man, for the dimension, for the commencing, yo, for the fencing, for the border, for the bread, for the grids, for the religion, for the relying upon the others, for the intelligence, for the obesity, for the obedience, for the allegiance, for the alignment, for the atonement, for the mono, for the monopolized, for the capital, for the punishment, for the poverty, for the poets and seers who see the sight to blind. I was in the rhythm of the spirit, for the giving, for the supplement, for the supplement body, for the daily bread. I guess I'm glad I made resources. Drank that, rolled that possibility again, for that rolled that dandelion right in the face and told me to make the wish.
Painting, hands parting, particularly comparison, competing for the competition to come into grips, realization for the gathering innate ideas, faith for the fusion for the grasping expansion, knowledge of knowing how to make that picture for the figuring out how to learn, expand the expansivism expressed for the base, for the steps of the stones, for the stoners, for the authenticity, for the hands of the dirty, with the grind, for the distasteful grammar, for the tongue to be displayed, for the displaced, for the replaced, for the reverb, for the imperfection, for the objective, for the course of reacting. Responding to although for the streaming the straight timelines without for the engagement and habits of the habitual thinking with the roundabout for the repetition, the not for the make sense of the only the within the ability for the reliable truth. Time for the brain, for the memory, for the infuse. Kind being for the confused, for the fussing, for the spontaneous reaction, for the heat, for the energy, for the reluctance, for the not so much to feel the body, for the sentiments, for not to nose. Sense of the brain, for the braille, for the scale, for the weight, for the friction, the frame, for the way, for the content, Brian, and for the venture, for the incident, for the events of the course. Control, which is the control of the divine. Presence and presence for the predominantly denominated, for the famished and the elements, for the commission, for the growing pains, for the sprouts and doubts and crop to the proportions instead of for the distorted, for the colors, for the offering. Stationary for the narrow-minded, for the metal, for the slow beat, the synonym of punishment. Enslaved for the justice and the forging, for the forgiveness and pricking, for the picket signs, for the combined, for the companies to compare, for the paragraph, for the parallels, and really spoken to poked and provocative pronouns. Scribble for what's prescribed. Distracting disaster for the disassembling, for the cognitive thinking, for the provoked evidence, revealing for the relevance. Disengagement for the intercourse is deprived, for the detrimental, for the final. Fatality, fatal. Attributes. Attributed for the outcome. Coming out. Close it. Set out the ground for the opponent opposed. Position to encompass the coming at every time for the hand striking of an hour, for the ending of outright. Outcry. Last for the outcast, for the state of the growth, for the spur by the spurs, the scream of the some of those with the grip of the containment for the areas arrive. Settle for the departure, for the apart, for the apparatus, for the rating, for the regional, for the residents, and resigning for the responsibility, for the required. Reform, retaining rhetoric, for the revenue, for the reactionary grips, for the being glued to the regiment, for the realignment, for the engagement, the plurals. Morals projected right in front of you, the line of age. Reacting for the action, or activate for the events, and trees in the forest, and like the bland for the fire state to eliminate for the celebratory occasion. Chanting, disparity for conclusion, consider for the offensive, of course, of the quarter, the complaint. Complaints, the complacency for the complete, complimenting for the complex, content for the controversy, contrive for the contribute. Trying to the tribal for the ways of the wearing of parties to the party, and selling for the celebrant for the celebrant for the discelebrant. Liberates and liberals. You choose.
I guess you were charged for being constant you being the contestant for the content. Adverse results for the reason for leaning on the learning for the pondering, like dust in the mirror to what to avoid and approaching with the provoking day for the presenting for the present. Growing up for the adolescent for the have the inherent. Corporate for the inherent is the way for the incoherent for the comprehend, the limiting for the limb for the generously generated for the reputation that is reputable enough for the embellish and the fulfillment to the engulf. Time empty and enough for the information, the formation, the informal growth. Groups and living for the dialogue to analyze the analog for the innovate. Invasion persuading the crusader for justice for the cooling down for the spontaneous combustion for the complicating for the complementary for the engagement to authorities and defeat the punishment instead of the punishment. Honorably avoid that without acknowledgement for the act supported for the distorted for the converted for the version for the plundering whenever but end for the never intended for the intended to be as a lenient evidence of the proven for the hypothetical. Your comparison to adjacent chanting or rants demanding when they can't deliver the information, the applicants and who reply for the contraception for the concept and derive for the upset for the setups and have settled down for the negligent and negligent enough and maybe officially enough for the patient for the wager for the earned that can't afford the time to pine. Spend vending for the instead of vending on a little way for the bent and energy for the let that with the different way to engage and deal for the work for the send home for the hindering behind defining ways of humane for the least of them and implore for the rendering for the benefits and the benevolence for the violence for the sin for the hinder who was sent to cruel that beyond that. Beyond you for the your confidence for the negligence and who told that intelligent ears and irresponsible gentlemen for the indulgent for the dull moment for the memorable able to remember the member to embarrassing impart mentions to pluralize imperial apparently imperatively implementing the employ for the imply for the pliers to pile that for the pillage for the swallow the pills with age pilgrimage and images of time to the ETA for the determined and the detrimental for the deprivation the thirsty hydroplane for the airways and the signification for the responsible for the enough for the facing their downturn. Your apprehension and attention today for vacate for the vacations and advocate for the advisor children for the reconciliation for the reconditioning for the receiving the reconnect rendering for the apprehension for the invasive preparation for the personified for the sign silver identification without a dent for them to be such a sign as the son of this out. You doubt the drought so that the thrive the point of diving dive into the divine for the development of the deployment diplomats for the diplomas decoy deprived the environment around that suppresses the supplier supplements the support for the sustaining support for the feeding of the supper settlement for the set up the upset uphold the appalled for the appetite for the appealing for the meals of the super meals for the milliness for the release without the rails repels repeated and reprimanded for the one of the coalition for the collective collapse corollary for the coronation for the correspondence for the corrective for the corruption disruption for the redundant for the renouncing region for the reflecting responses for reasons to react further for the rendition for the renovating for the provocative for the impulse and important implicit complacency to convert important implements complacency to convert for the company's lonely extroverted for the introspective for the objectifying for the common ground for the levitated the levies in the watergate for the gambits of the complicated for the application for the improvement the compelling is common to complete compositions of peaches to fold in the Olympic over the ceremony for the celebration for the celebratory or celebrate confident seldom hate your grand opening for the cellmate has to fate for the debate Devotion to vote for the fornicate. Numerous are reasons for the raising amount of the victims and the victory for the conviction, for the separated, for the convicted, for the convoluted, for the island pro, like finding for the phony, the phone home, for the obtuse and landline, for the straight. Stakes and states and state for the faith, for the facilitate, for the faculty, for the code, for the phalange, for the angel, for the only idolized, for the standards, for the liberations and libation, for the liberal, liability for the liars and the innate, annihilation. I guess you were charged for being constant.
I guess you were charged for being constantly. For constant, you being the contestant for the content. Adverse results for the reason for leaning on and learning for the pondering. And like dust in the mirror to what's avoiding, approaching with a provoking day for the presenting for the present. Growing up for the adolescent for the have the inherent. Corporate for the inherent is the way for the incoherent, for the comprehend, the limiting for the limb, for the generously generated, for the reputation that is reputable enough for the embellishing, the fulfillment to the engulf. Time empty and enough for the information, the formation, the informal growth. Groups and living for the dialogue, to analyze the analog for the innovate. The invasion persuading the crusader for justice, for the cooling down, for the spontaneous combustion, for the complicating, for the complementary, for the engagement to authorities and defeat the punishment instead of the punishment. Pointedly avoid that for the other acknowledgement, for the act supported, for the distorted, for the converted, for the version, for the plundering, winner, bring winner, but end for the never intended, for the intended to be as a lenient evidence of the proven, for the hypothetical. Your comparison to adjacent chanting or rants demanding when they can deliver the information to applicants and who apply for the contraception, for the concept and derive for the upset, for the setups and have settled down for the negligent and negligent enough for the maybe then officially enough for the patient, for the wager, for the earned and can't afford the time to pine. Spend vending for the instead of vending on a maneuver way for the bent to the energy for the lent that with the different ways to engage and dealer for the work for the send home for the hint. Hindering. Behind finding ways of healing vain for the least of them and implore for the rendering for the benefits and the benevolence for the violent for the sin for the sin for the hinder who was sent too cruel that beyond that. Beyond you for the your confidence for the negligence and who told that intelligent ears and irresponsible gentlemen for the indulgent for the dull moment for the memorable able to remember the member to embarrassing embark mentions to pluralize. Imperial apparently imperatively implements and the employee for the imply for the pliers to pile that for the pillage for the swallow the pills with age. Pilgrimage and images of time to the ETA for the determinant and the detrimental for the deprivation, the thirsty hydroplane for the airways and the signification for the responsible for the enough of the facing their downturn. Your apprehension intentions today for vacate for the vacations and advocate for the advised children for the reconciliation for the reconditioning for the receiving the reconnect and rendering for the apprehension for the invasive preparation for the personified for the signs of identification without a dent for them to be such astonished as a sorter with this doubt. You doubt the droughts without the thrive to the point of diving. Dive into the divine. Divine for the development of the deployment. Diplomats for the diplomas. Decoy deprived the environment around that suppresses the supplier. Supplements the support for the sustaining support for the feeding of the supper. Settlement for the setup. Set up the upset. Uphold the appalled for the appetite for the appealing for the meals of the super meals for the milliness for the release without the rails repels repeated and the rep per minute for the vulnerability coalition for the collective collapse. Corollary for the coronation, for the correspondence, for the corrective, for the corruption, disruption, for the redundant, for the renouncing region, for the reflecting responses and reasons to react. Further for the rendition, for the renovating, for the provocative, for the impulse and important and implicit complacency to convert. Important implements and complacency with the convert for the company's lonely extroverted, for the introspective, for the objectifying, for the common ground, for the levitated, the levies in the watergate, for the gambits of the complicated, for the net application, for the improvement, the compelling is common to complete. Compositions, the peaches, the folding, the Olympic over the ceremony for the celebration for the celebratory or celibate, confident, seldom hate your grand opening for the cellmate has to fate for the debate, devotion to vote for the fornicate, numerous of reasons for the raising amount of the victims and the victory for the conviction for the separated for the convicted for the convoluted and the island pro like founded for the phony, the phone home for the obtuse and landline for the straights. Stakes and states, the state for the faith, for the facilitate, for the faculty, for the code, for the phalange, for the angel, for the only idolized, for the standards, for the liberations and libation for the liberal, liability for the liars and the innate, annihilation.